According to a study performed at Stanford University, it is estimated that we process around 60,000 thoughts a day. That's close to 1 thought per second. Impressive, isn't it? Impressive, isn't it? The same study also showed that 90% of our thoughts are repetitive, meaning that we experience them day after day repeatedly. But the part of the study that most concerned me was that the majority of our thoughts are negative. And these are also the most powerful ones. And that's the reason why I came to speak to you today. But to understand my talk, you need some basic knowledge on how our thoughts work. And it's more or less like this. We undergo a thought. And then this thought creates neuronal connections in our brains. And these neural connections create chemical reactions, which then trigger or positive or negative emotions, depending on what the original thought was. But I'm more of a visual learner. So let's see how the situation would work in a real-life situation. This is my friend Phil. And he's going to take a very important step for him. Pay attention. In this simple situation to imagine, Phil has created a new negative feeling, which is going to follow him day after day. Tough luck, right? But this situation is one that happens and is complicated to avoid. The problem is when Phil starts accumulating these situations, these experiences, which trigger those negative sensations. How do you think he's going to feel when day after day after day, his brain unconsciously triggers those negative sensations? Not very well, right? The truth is that Phil is entering a negative spiral of thoughts, which is very complicated to escape. And as you can imagine, not pleasant at all. Now, this spiral is complicated to escape, but it is completely achievable. I have to confess something, and it's that I'm not able of raising all your negative thoughts in my 7-minute talk, but I'm going to make my best. So when you leave this room, you have the ability of being able to learn how to control your own thoughts. The first thing that we need to understand is that negative feelings such as fear or stress are not external entities which magically come into our heads. No, they're created completely by us. They're created in here, and the only thing they do is hurt us. Therefore, the vital skill which we need to learn is the selection and process of the emotions and thoughts which we wish to accept. And in order to extract these negative emotions from our minds, or negative thoughts from our minds, it is important that we follow some guidelines, and I've devised some important points which I think are good towards reaching the goal of being able to control our thoughts. And the first one is to recognize and name our emotions, because the majority of them cruise through our minds without us even noticing. Therefore, we need to become conscious of our passive and involuntary thoughts and figure out what is causing them. When these thoughts only bring potential harm with them, then the best thing to do is to block them. Don't think about them, don't process them. As I've stated before, we approximately process 1 instantaneous thought per second. But when we decide to think about it and process it, it becomes repetitive, which, as you know, means that we will experience it in the following days. And if this is a positive emotion, or sensation, perfect, it's really good. But if it's a negative one, we need to try and prevent it from poisoning our minds and staying in our minds in the following days or even weeks. Therefore, what we need to do is to try and block and build a barrier against this thought. Now, there are some occasions in which building a barrier is just simply too complicated. Therefore, what we need to do is to analyze the thought and, well, tell ourselves that tough luck, but this thought will eventually go, and it will not last forever. Another very important point, which somehow people don't manage to apply, although it's very logic, is to avoid negative prompts. If there are certain people, places, conversation topics, or songs which trigger those negative thoughts in our minds and make us think about those topics, well, simply move away from them and keep them to one side of our lives. And finally, what I think is the most important point of my presentation, and it is to learn. Learn from the emotion. Because as human beings, we are bound to learn from our errors in order to be a better version of us in the future. So when you come across a negative sensation which has hurt you, it is very, very useful to analyze it and think what we could do in a similar situation if it happens in the future. I like to think of negative emotions as vaccines, because in small doses, they can actually help us enormously and make us stronger. Although the brain is an organ, it behaves fully as a muscle. And what happens to a muscle if we don't exercise it and we don't put time in strengthening it? Well, obviously, it's going to be weak and vulnerable. But if, on the contrary, we decide to invest our time in strengthening the most important muscle we have in our bodies, then I can assure you, you're going to notice a very big change in your lives. Now, let's be serious. All these points are very cool on paper or delivered by me in this presentation. But they're completely meaningless if you don't decide that you're going to apply them in your own lives. I want to finish this presentation with a quote by a rather smart guy, and I want you to reflect on it and think about it and what it means. A positive change is at your reach, and the sole tool which you need to achieve it is in here. Thank you.